Hi everyone, it's me. Welcome to today's video. We are on Bookmas Day 3, and today we are going to do our usual monthly wrap-up. So we are going to be wrapping up the 14 books that I read in November, and can I just say, November was literally the best reading month of my life. I found so many good reads this past month. I don't know what was going on. I feel like maybe just the books I selected to read this past month were books that just really worked with me, because out of the 14 books I read, 3 of them were 5 stars. A whole bunch of them were like a 4.5 stars, very close to a 5 stars, and I'm pretty sure the majority of the books that I read in November were at least 4 stars and above. I maybe had 2 3.5 star reads, but yeah, all in all, this was such a good reading month, and I just felt so motivated and excited to continue reading books because I was on such a roll finding these wonderful reads. First things first, I know we're wrapping up November today, but I am always looking forward to the next month of reading, and I just received my book of the month package, so thought we could do a little unboxing together. And yes, we do have Sage back here. And I also want to thank Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. Seeing this blue box literally makes me feel so happy every single month, every time I see this on my doorstep. Oh, also, if you don't know what Book of the Month is yet, you clearly haven't been paying attention, because I have been a subscriber to Book of the Month for over 2 years, and it is essentially a book subscription service where their wonderful team will curate a list of 5 or 6 books, I want to say, every single month that you can choose from to be your Book of the Month. The selections that I've seen for the past 2 years have always been quite diverse. There's always a good variety of genres every month, and I've also discovered a lot of my new favorite authors through Book of the Month. So I got 2 books for the month of December. The first one is actually Best Offer Wins by Marissa Cuscino. This is a thriller, which is very surprising for me to pick a thriller, but the premise of this just sounded so much fun. The concept of it is kind of reminding a little bit of None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell, because we have this dynamic of a character entering someone else's household with an ulterior motive. So we are living in a world with an insanely competitive housing market, which sounds very relatable. But our protagonist Margot is 37 years old. She's been looking for a house for 18 months and she's lost 11 bidding wars. So when she gets a tip about the perfect house in the perfect neighborhood, she decides she's desperate. She needs to upsize. She needs to buy a house. She feels really cramped in her current apartment. And so to better her chances of buying this house, she decides to start stalking the current owners of this house. As she starts infiltrating the current homeowners' lives, she continues to get more and more unhinged. And I think this is just one of those stories that keeps getting more and more ridiculous. Yeah, really like None of This Is True type vibes, but with like a house buying bidding war twist, which I think is really fun and honestly a little bit relatable in this time and age. So that's the first book I picked, and the second one is actually very fitting for a December read. Good Spirits by B.K. Borison. This is a winter holiday romance where I'm pretty sure we follow the ghost of Christmas past, and then we follow the woman that he is assigned to haunt. It sounds like such a cute magical realism romance that is so fitting for the season. I definitely need to read this in December. So those were my 2 picks of the month, and now is a wonderful time to either join Book of the Month yourself, or if you are getting into holiday shopping and you're kind of stumped as to what to buy for someone, you can get them a Book of the Month membership as a gift. You can gift a 3-month plan, a 6-month, or a 12-month plan. You can also choose from a few different delivery formats. So if you want to send a physical gift card, if you want to send it through email, or if you want the digital image that you can print out at home. Also, every single Book of the Month gift purchased within this holiday season will also come with a hat. So there are 4 different options of hats you can choose. I chose this unreliable narrator hat. Hold on, I'm gonna put it on. This is truly just so cute, and it's gonna keep me warm throughout the winter months. If you want Book of the Month for yourself though, you're like, I don't want to gift it, I want it for myself, you can join and get your first book for $5 using the code HOLLY, and you will also get your choice of hat if you use that code. The gift keeps on giving, because for all new or existing members, all December boxes in the US will also receive a cute seasonal gift wrap paper, and also a cute holiday bookmark. We love how everything is so on theme this month. Thank you again to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. Let's get back into the wrap up. For my reading breakdown for the genres that I read, out of the 14 books, 8 of them were fantasy. I was really in a fantasy mood, you guys. So yeah, 8 of them were fantasy. 1 was a sci-fi. I read 1 horror, 1 romance, 1 historical fiction, 1 general fiction, and 1 graphic novel. So lots of good variety in there. Also for my November TBR, we read 5 out of 5. So yay, did it again. And let's just get into this really successful month of reading. So starting with the 8 fantasies, the first book is The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. Wonderful high fantasy. I really loved this story for the whimsical feeling magical world and also for the unique pace of storytelling. So for a little synopsis, we are set in a world where our people worship these guardians that basically are like animal gods or animal spirits. So we have 8 different guardians. We have the raven, of course, we have the fox, the bear, the hound, the tiger, the dragon, and each animal has their certain characteristics that kind of flow down to the people who choose them as their guardian. So the ravens tend to be very scholarly. The foxes are very cunning. They make very good spies and assassins. And so on top of all of that, we also have an emperor in this world. And every 24 years, we must switch emperors. At the start of the story, that time has come. It's time for our emperor to step down. And so per tradition, there is a competition that is hosted where 1 representative from each animal guardian faction gets to compete for a chance to become the next emperor. So that competition starts, but the night before the trials begin, one of the contenders gets murdered. And so our protagonist, Nima, is a raven scholar and she is tasked with trying to find out who did it. And she also now has to compete in the trial. She has to take the place and compete for the chance to become the next emperor. I loved the narrative style in this book. It really felt slow, but not in a boring way. I feel like Antonia Hodgson, I don't know what she did. It felt almost like you were reading a historical fiction, which really made sense because I looked up Antonia Hodgson after the fact because I wanted to check on her backlist after I finished reading The Raven Scholar, and I noticed that she is primarily a historical fiction author, and I could really notice her historical fiction storytelling within The Raven Scholar. It was very clearly a fantasy story, like no doubt about that, but I just feel like the pacing of the story was so leisurely. It was so calm. It was very pleasant to read in that way. And also we did focus a lot on building the history of this world. Like not only did we find out the characteristics of all the animal guardians, but we also found out all of this history that had happened in the past in this world. And I found that so much fun to read. So the storytelling just felt so unique. It did not feel like you were in a rush at all while you were reading the book. Even though high stakes things were happening, you were just going through them at this very day in the life pace. I also really loved this whimsical element to the writing where we had this sassy animal companion that joins in partway through the story. And I feel like the companion part was done very well. So much character, so much uniqueness. We really played with formatting of the font, like the printed font in the book with the animal companion element. And I found that to just be really fun to read. I also thought the trials in this book were really well done. You guys know I love a creative trial. I love a creative themed trial, and each trial in this competition was based off of each animal guardian, and they were so well done with the themes. None of the trials were straightforward. None of them were like, a lot of them you didn't even know what was going on. Like you didn't know what the goal of the trial was, and I kind of love that when you're going in blind to a trial and you, along with the protagonist, have to figure out what you're even supposed to do. That added a lot of excitement. There were a lot of twists and turns at the end of this book as well. Yeah, The Raven Scholar, absolutely loved it. The next fantasy I read was one of my 5-star reads of the month. So Red City by Marie Lu. Oh, this was so good. This was so good. So this is an urban fantasy. I have been describing this as a Jade City meets a Romeo and Juliet, but if V. Schwab wrote it. We are set in California. We have 2 rival syndicates that both develop this alchemical substance called sand. And sand is something that when you ingest just enhances parts of you. So if you're strong, you'll be even stronger on sand. If you're weak, you'll be weaker on sand. Like, your strengths and weaknesses both get exaggerated when you ingest sand. So these two rival clans manufacture, process, handle the dealing out of this sand, and there's obviously a lot of political tension between these two clans. We follow Sam and Ari in this world. We start with them as children, as they go to school, as they meet each other, as they become friends, as they maybe could have become something a little bit more, but before anything more could happen between them, they get whisked away on these separate journeys where they start getting affiliated with the two separate clans, and they just kind of lose touch. Years later, when they're adults, they are now up in the ranks at these two opposing clans. We have to watch them as they start interacting again, now on opposite sides of these clans. So they're now basically enemies. We watch them as they do these horrible things to each other, as they're forced to do these horrible things with each other, and we have to find out if their humanity is still kind of in them, if their previous relationship, their previous friendship still matters, if they still care about each other, or if the clans are now more important. Oh my gosh, this writing was so delicious. Like, as I mentioned, Marie Lu's writing I find is very reminiscent to V. Schwab writing, which for me is obviously like an amazing thing. One thing in particular that I absolutely loved about the writing is how inanimate objects were described. Because we have a very strong running theme of alchemy in this book that is actually explored, like we really go into the science behind it and the history and the facts and everything. We don't just have the essence of alchemy in this book, like it is truly an alchemical book, which I love. The writing really matched that alchemy theme because of how objects were described, because a big part of alchemy is like understanding the soul of objects pretty much. Like, if you want to change this into this, you need to sort of understand very deeply the scientific makings of both of them, but also the souls of both of them. And I feel like the writing really described objects as having souls very well, even in alchemy scenes. So I think it was just a really good mood set with the writing in that way. And then the characters, I think, were just so well done in this one. You truly felt the angst in this. I think this book gave me the feeling that I wanted to feel in Our Infinite Fates, like the angst towards each other, the mix of love and hate and confusion between two characters was really captured well in this. Like, you're on this path of you really love this person, you have so much love for them, but life just continues to force you to do these absolutely horrendous things to each other. And I love following a conflicted character, and that was done so well too. We really dove into the minds of our characters and saw them really try and process what they were doing. We saw them feel bad about what they were doing. We saw them try to justify what they were doing. We saw everything kind of on all sides. I love complex characters. I love morally gray characters, and that was done so well in Red City. Yeah, I have only good things to say about Red City. It is the first in a trilogy. Would totally recommend it. I'm already dying to read the next one. Diving straight into our next 5-star read of this month, I read The Poet Empress by Shen. This one is a standalone fantasy, and this one is actually not standing up because it's a very floppy paperback, which is a wonderful thing, but we'll put it down here. I hope it's not cut off at the bottom of the frame. But this was stunning, beautiful. You guys know I have been obsessed with A Song to Drown Rivers since I read it like 2 years ago. This is my new Song to Drown Rivers, okay? I think both with the premise of the story and also the feelings it gave me and the themes it explored, it really is reminiscent to A Song to Drown Rivers in so many different ways, but this one feels more gritty. It is more brutal. This one is adult, so this one really just goes more into those heavy themes, and I am obsessed with this book. But for the synopsis, we are set in the Azalea dynasty. Our world is not in a good condition. Most of the world is consumed by famine and poverty, and our protagonist, Wei Yin, actually lives in a small village with her family that is not doing well at all. She has lost a lot of siblings, and so at this point she will do anything to help those she loves, including offering herself up to become a concubine to the crown prince. So we follow her as she enters into this royal court from a very disadvantaged position, as she tries to navigate these court politics and to also try and take this kingdom out from within, because this prince that she has offered herself to is actually very well known in this world to be very brutal, to be very cruel. And so to take him down, she has to get close to him, has to actually try and get to know him, and she also has to learn the forbidden art of poetry magic. This was beautiful. It is so rich in culture. The writing is beautiful. It feels like you are reading this very magical ancient myth. And I found this book to be so unique because it wasn't actually very plot heavy. We really focused more on the characters, and in particular, not even Wei Yin so much, but we focused a lot on the characters around her, on the royal family, on the prince that she has given herself to. We really did a deep dive on a lot of these characters, and again, this is one of those stories where you hate these characters. They are truly despicable. They are just not good people. They're not good people at all. But when you start diving into things, you realize that things are so much more complex than they seem on surface level. It is a very heavy book. There are some very dark moments, so just be ready for that before you dive in. But I loved this. It kept me on my toes, even up to the last chapter, even up to the last page of this book. I was like, I still do not know what our character is going to do, because throughout the story, as she was learning things and opening her eye to certain things, you kind of kept changing your mind on like, okay, what is actually the best thing to do here? What is the best way forward? And you don't really get an answer to that until the very end. And even at the very end, when she makes her decision, it's like, oh, like I know why you did this. I understand that it was the best thing to do in the situation, but it still hurts. And that's all I'm gonna say. But you definitely need to read The Poet Empress when it comes out next year. It's so good. This next fantasy I read is definitely a cozier one. I think after reading a lot of heavy reads, I was really craving something lighter, something cute, and so I picked up Violet Thistlewaite Is Not a Villain Anymore by Emily Krempholtz. This book is so cute. It is so cute. Not only is it just aesthetically so cute on the cover, but the insides of the book are very cute too. So this is a cozy little fantasy rom-com. I wouldn't even call this a romantasy. It really feels like a rom-com set in a fantasy world. But in this one, we follow Violet, who has always grown up at the side and working for this very dark magic villain. At the beginning of the story, that villain is defeated, that villain dies. And so Violet at this point is like, this is my chance. This is my turn for a second chance in life to become good. Her power, her magic in this world is plant magic. And so in the past, she's used her dark side of plant magic. So she's always grown thorns, poisons, kind of these dark plants. And now she wants to use her power for good. So she decides to move into the small town called Dragon's Rest. And she opens a flower shop. At this flower shop, she actually shares half of her greenhouse with her landlord, a grumpy man named Nathaniel, and Nathaniel actually runs an apothecary next door. He wants nothing to do with her, but a blight starts appearing in this town, starts attacking all of the plants in town, and so her and Nathaniel have to kind of work together to figure it out, to save their plants, to save their greenhouse, and so that is our story. And yeah, this book was just so cute. It was exactly what I needed. It's really, really cozy, and one of my favorite things about this book was a sentient plant character that is just so sassy. I think that's something I discovered this past month, is that I really enjoy plant companion characters that are grumpy, that are sassy, that are kind of a little bit mean. There are a lot of elements of whimsy in this book as well. One of them was, there are actually, hold on, let me try and find an example. Throughout the book, we get these little illustrations of these chalkboard signs, like, you know, the chalkboard signs that storefronts put outside of their stores. We got those at every like chapter heading, so they looked like this. And so we would see a sassy message from her and then like his comeback to it, and I found that to be such a fun, unique way to add banter into your book. So I thought the atmosphere in this book to be wonderful. The banter was wonderful, but I will say my one major reason why this book wasn't like a 4 or 5 star to me is that outside of the fun, silly banter, I honestly did not feel a lot of romantic buildup in this book. I think the romantic relationship just kind of happened all of a sudden. I think this book was tackling a lot of things at the same time. With the blight, we had some villains coming back. We had a lot of subplots with secondary characters. We had Violet fighting with her inner demons. And on top of that, I feel like we just didn't spend a lot of time developing the actual romance in this book. So even though I knew the romance was happening, it was very predictable. I didn't actually feel the gradual development of the romantic relationship. But this was a wonderful read. Honestly, would be very good in the spring because I think of the plant theme, of the flower theme. It just feels feels very much like a spring book. Yeah, this book came out this fall and I read it this fall, but honestly, I think it would be the perfect spring read. Okay, we dove into a couple of series that I wanted to continue. So I actually finished the Prison Healer trilogy by reading The Blood Traitor by Lynette Noni. This is the third and final book to the Prison Healer series, a fun YA fantasy series that I've talked a lot about over the past few months as I've been reading through. So I'm not going to go too in depth with the story and everything, but essentially this is a YA dystopian fantasy. We follow Kiva, who has grown up in a prison her entire life, and she actually works as a healer at the prison. We get entangled with the royal family, we get entangled with this rebellion that's on the rise. I think this series just felt so nostalgic in the best ways. You really scratch that itch. Like when you want a YA dystopian, this covers all the things that you would want and crave. We get trials, we get found family, we get all of these lovely feelings of reunion, especially in this book. I found there were so many reuniting moments that made me just smile, laugh, like cry happy tears. But on top of that, I do feel like this series has a lot of creative, unique elements thrown in. There are some fun twists that catch you off guard as you continue to read. It's really a format that has been done over and over and over again, but sort of reimagined so it doesn't feel exactly copy and paste compared to other books in the same genre. I think Lynette Noni did a really good job at balancing those. Like she knows what elements you crave when you pick up a book like this, so she put all of that in there, but she didn't make it so overly predictable and same. But this one was so fun. We did a lot of traveling around the world, which I love, just seeing different parts of a fantastical world, and the characters in the series will have my heart forever. I love them so much. I think because this world is very simple, because the story is very easy to follow, we only follow one POV, and honestly, we don't have that large of a cast of characters. It just makes it so easy to latch onto these lovable characters in the story and really feel attached to them. The protagonist, Kiva, does do some silly things sometimes, okay? She is just a girl. She is a YA female protagonist that doesn't choose the right decision a lot of the time, and throughout the series you will want to scream at her, but kind of in a fun way, at least for me. So that was The Blood Traitor. And then I also continued the Ember Quartet series. So the first book is An Ember in the Ashes. This second one that I read is A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir. And I really did enjoy this one as well. This is also a YA dystopian fantasy, but it reads more mature. There are darker themes in this one. I think the world just feels grittier as well. There are a lot of creepy creatures in this world that I really enjoy reading about, and I find the story of this one to be very good as well. It's you know, one of those, you join the rebellion, you're fighting against oppression, all those good dystopian elements you would want in a story. But in the first book we follow Laya and Elias. Laya is a scholar, so we have 4 different factions in this world. We have the scholars, the masks, the marines, or something like that, and another one. I can't remember the name of the 4th one right now, but Laya is a scholar, and the scholars used to thrive in this world, but the marshals have taken over and have really oppressed all of the other factions, the scholars especially. So Laya grows up as a scholar with her family, but at the beginning of the first book, her brother gets captured by the marshals. And so Laya, in attempts to save her brother, decides to join the rebellion and infiltrate the Marshal Empire as a slave. And on the other side, we have Elias, who is a part of the Marshal Empire, and so he is currently training to be a mask, which is basically a martial soldier of the most elite kind. But as he goes through his training, as he goes through his school, he's really struggling to believe that the marshals are the right side to be on. He sees these horrible things that the marshals are doing. He doesn't agree with the things that he sees going around him, and so he kind of has one foot in the door, one foot out the door. And so these are our 2 main characters that we follow as their paths intertwine as they figure out their own stories. This second book opened up another POV, and I'm not going to tell you what that POV is. You'll have to read it to know. But I actually found that new POV that was introduced in this book to be my favorite one to read in this story. I found that their arc was just the most interesting, was the most unique, and also the one that hit me the hardest emotionally. Like, I felt so bad for this third POV character. I really like characters that are torn between 2 sides, that have these conflicting emotions and have 2 sides dragging them to do certain things. So I really liked liked that part of this book. I think the story is also very good for a second book in a series as well. I thought each POV had such a clear goal, a clear task in mind that we had to complete before the end of the story. So the story felt like it moved. We weren't aimlessly wandering through a second book. We did not have second book syndrome with this one, but we knew exactly where we wanted to be by the end of the story. And I found that to be very motivating, like a very motivating factor to continue reading this book very, very quick. What made this book feel weird to me though was I found the storytelling was a little strange. First of all, I think we had some weird time jumps that kind of broke the pacing as we went on along the story. It would be like, we would read one page, be really in the moment, and then on the next page, it would be 3 weeks later. And I would feel so like jolted out of it. And we wouldn't even take the time to fill in what happened in those 3 weeks. It was just like, okay, time's passed and that's it. We're in a different place now. And that kind of took me out of the pace of the story quite a few times in this book. And then also with our multi-POV, we had our characters finding out different things at different times. So like Elias would find out something that would impact Laya later in the story. But I found the order that we found out about things and the characters that we found out about these things through was very strangely done. Because like, for example, Elias would find out something that would really highly impact Laya and would be really more emotional finding it out through Laya's perspective, but we would get that reveal in Elias's POV first. So then like 100 pages later, when we get that reveal through Laya's POV, it didn't hit as hard emotionally because I already saw it coming. I already knew what was coming and I had already come to terms with it at that point, and so it didn't have as big of an impact on me as it should. There were a couple of instances of that in this book, so it wasn't the perfect read for me, but I am still very, very excited to continue in the series. Again, I do love our characters, I love the overall story, and I've heard the third and fourth book get real intense, so I'm excited to continue this one. And then we read one of my most anticipated reads of this year. That was, of course, The Strength of the Few by James Islington, the second book to the Hierarchy series. The first book is The Will of the Many. So this is a fantasy story that for me borders on being sci-fi. Like we're set in a sort of sci-fi world, but we follow a fantasy story structure. It's honestly a little bit hard for me to talk about my experience reading this book because of the unique format that this book takes. And if you've read the first book, if you've read The Will of the Many, you will know what I'm talking about. But going into this book, I had no idea how James Islington was going to pull this book off. It's just such an ambitious idea. It is a concept that I have actually never read in a book before, and so I was really looking forward to seeing how this would be done. I was scared going in that I'd be confused and that it would be hard to keep track of things, but I do have to commend James Islington for doing such a good job with this one. Everything felt straightforward. It was pretty, like, decently easy to follow, I would say. When you think about like the scope of the book, the ease of reading, it's not like the easiest book to read in the world, but relatively to the scope of this book, to the ambition of the story, I feel like it was relatively easy to read and easy to follow. So applause for James Islington for doing that and pulling that off. Essentially, this is a story where you start with one POV and then you expand into multi-POV. And I was having a lot of fun in this book because each of our POVs went on such different trajectories, so different, in fact, that we had to actually do a lot of world building and expansion in this one. With a lot of fantasy series, of course, we get a lot of world building in book one, and sometimes in book two, you're kind of already settled in that world. You might do a little bit of expansion on the world, but overall, like, you understand, you know, most things, how the world works. In this one though, we had to just learn everything all over again, essentially. And I had so much fun, genuinely, with that in this book. So again, very well done. This is one of those books though that leaves you with more questions than answers. Like, first and foremost, as you're going through the book, you're kind of in this constant state of having 100 questions in your head that maybe get slowly answered throughout the book, but then the more answers you get, the more questions you form. So you might get something explained to you, but then that explanation will open up 10 new questions. And by the end of the book, like, you still have so many questions. And I feel like that can be frustrating to some readers, but for me, like, I love that. I love being strung along. Now I'm just dangling on the edge of this cliff, waiting for the third book. I also think the character work in this book was a lot stronger than The Will of the Many. I think these books in general are very plot-heavy books with less emphasis on character development, but in this one, we definitely got into that a little bit more, especially with our protagonist. We really got into the idea of how things that you experience, like first-hand experiences, and also just your knowledge, the information that you get, will really impact your view on the world and your goals in life. And yeah, I just had so much fun reading this. My one major thing about this book, why it wasn't a 5-star, was some of the pacing felt a little clunky. Our 3 different POVs went on such different trajectories at such different paces that at points, flipping from one POV to the other felt very clunky to me. Like, it didn't really flow very well. If you read each individual POV as like a straight on story, I feel like each story was quite strong, but there was something about the flipping back and forth that didn't really work for me in terms of pacing. But overall, this was a wonderful read. So that was the strength of the few. Okay, and then our last fantasy that I read was actually a part of this Arcanum Unbounded by Brandon Sanderson. So this was my obligatory Sanderson read of the month. I read the Edgedancer novella that is included in this collection, so I didn't read this entire book. I just read the one short story. And Edgedancer is a part of the Stormlight archive. It is technically 2.5, so it sits between the Words of Radiance and Oathbringer. And we follow this very childlike character named Lift, who we met briefly in Words of Radiance, and we just expand more into her story. In this one, we get a little bit more information, we get some development, we get some setup for the next book. I don't know if this is a mandatory read before jumping into Oathbringer, but I do find it gave me a lot of good context about her, and if she does take a bigger role in the upcoming books, I'm glad that I've read more about her at this point. And also there were some fun Easter eggs and everything that were included in this novella. I found this to be a fun read. I don't know, I don't have too much to say about it. It was light because we're following this childlike character. We have a little bit more whimsy in the perspective. I really enjoy some of the quirky parts of her character, like she has magic, but she refers to her own magic as her awesomeness. She also actually has a sassy plant companion, which I really, really loved. And I do feel like Brandon Sanderson writes young perspectives very well. I think he tends to write things younger than he intends, because in previous books like Mistborn, in Trust of the Emerald Sea, even in Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, I find that he, like, when he gets whimsical, he feels young. Like, his writing feels very YA, even middle grade. And with books like Mistborn, it didn't really work with me because I feel like those stories were trying to be a little bit more mature, but written in a younger way, where in this one, we follow a young character in a more mature world that has already been built up to be a very like complex adult gritty world. I found that the youngness in his writing worked very well in this one. So yeah, I enjoyed it. There are a couple things about Lift's character that I don't particularly love at the moment. She's a character that is very brutally judgmental about people with disabilities, about people who have different sized bodies, people who are born different. So there are just a couple things about her as a character that I don't really get along with, but I'm also hoping that some of that will be a part of her larger like character arc as she develops through the main series. I'm hoping that's just kind of a setup for more growth to come, because yeah, she is a very young character. Obviously she's going to have some flaws, but that was Edgedancer. And then the sci-fi I read this month was Morningstar by Pierce Brown. Not going to talk about this one too much because I feel like between long form videos and short content, I have just ranted and raved about this book so much. I feel like you don't need to watch me talk about it again, but this was another 5-star read this month. It was perfect. It was so good. The more I read into this Red Rising series, the more I fall in love with it. The characters are amazing. The themes of friendship, of brotherhood, of sisterhood, of trusting each other, of overthrowing the big bad. So good in this one. I will say Pierce Brown is just like so cruel for some of the things he did to us in this book. Like, there were so many moments that caught me off guard, so many moments that just hurt me. But this was a wonderful conclusion to this first trilogy in the Red Rising world. I will be continuing to read in like Era 2, probably starting in the new year, but I am overall just so glad that I continued to read this series past the first book, because like Red Rising was just okay for me. Like, it was just average. I was expecting a masterpiece with Red Rising, and I didn't get that. But you guys convinced me to continue on in the series, and Golden Sun and Morningstar were definitely both worth it. And I fully am like on the hype train for this series now. So thank you for convincing me to continue with this one. But yeah, so many hard-hitting space war moments of brutality, of violence, but then also we get these little quiet moments interspersed throughout where we just see our characters being, I don't want to say humans because like they're technically kind of like genetically modified humans at this point. It's a sci-fi, right? But we really get these human moments with our characters, these quiet moments where you might hate a character, but then you see this character in a quiet, softer moment, and then you just think, maybe I don't hate them after all. And the redemptions we get with these characters are also really wonderful. Pierce Brown also knows how to make you mourn for the death of a character that you hate. Like, you will hate a character throughout the entire story, but you still feel bad at their death. And I don't know how he does it. I do think it really is that element of seeing the humanity in the worst characters. So even though you're like, yes, this person had to die, you still feel sad about it in certain ways. So yeah, Morningstar, wonderful. Gonna continue with arc 2 of This World in the New Year. Okay. I read a horror book. This is kind of a gothic fantasy horror, but I do feel like it read more horror than fantasy to me. So this is Hazelthorn by C.G. Drews. Definitely something different to what I normally read, something that is more gory, something that is more just general horror, but I really, really loved this read. I thought it was really, really good. We are set in a gothic mansion called Hazelthorn. We follow Evander, who is a very interesting character. He is queer, he is autistic, he has a lot of rage built up inside of him, but he lives a very isolated life. He has been sort of adopted, taken in by this reclusive billionaire who takes care of him, but also keeps him locked up in his bedroom for the most part in an abandoned wing in this estate. And Evander lives by these rules where he can't leave his bedroom, he can't like leave the estate, he can't go out into the gardens, and he also cannot interact with the billionaire's grandson because of an incident that happened in the past where Evander and this grandson used to be friends, but there was an incident that almost left Evander dead. However, at the beginning of the story, our billionaire dies, and then we go on this story of like inheritance games, kind of. Like, we get a lot of these dislikable relatives of the family that come in and try and take a piece of this Hazelthorn estate or of the billionaire's inheritance. And we also go on this murder mystery story because the death of this billionaire has been ruled as natural, but Evander does not believe it was natural. He believes that this is a case of poisoning. So this was a really good and different read for me. I love the setting first and foremost. I always love settings where a kind of haunted gothic house has almost a character of its own, and this house very much felt alive in its own way, had its own personality, and I love that for like a gothic house moment. Evander, as I mentioned, also was a very interesting character to read. He's a very angry character, he's a very flawed character, and we really saw deep into his mind where he was constantly thinking of these things of like, why am I not good enough? Why am I different than other people? Why am I the way I am? And throughout the story, we saw a lot of growth as we went on through this like spooky horror story. This book was also so planty, so poisony, which for me was like the perfect vibe for an end of October, early November read. And we also actually had a little bit of an amnesia moment, which is another book trope that I love, because Evander has these very fuzzy memories and lost memories from his childhood. We actually took a lot of time throughout the story where Evander was trying to piece together his past, piece together things that happened in his childhood, try and find out what happened to his parents before this billionaire took him in. I thought this book was wonderful. It is very dark. There are some content warnings that C.G. Drew included at the beginning of this book, and I'm sure they're somewhere online, so definitely check those out before you dive into this book. But yeah, it was wonderful. Switching moods entirely, let's talk about the one romance that I read this month. So first of all, I want to thank Bestie Ellen for sending me this book. So generous, truly, and you gave me the most wonderful reading experience with this one. Definitely a really good one for me to dive into this month because, again, I did read so many heavy, dark, emotional reads that I needed something lighter and something more fun. So this is The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. I do overall really enjoy Catherine Center's romance. romance writing. She is one of those low spice romance writers first and foremost, but she also is really good at throwing in more complex, sad themes in her books as well. There's always something that her characters are going through, something that they're working on within themselves. And she's also really good at throwing in really absurd moments in her romances. So the synopsis of this one is we follow Hannah. Hannah is a bodyguard, but a bodyguard that you wouldn't suspect. She is very small of stature, like she's short. She looks more like she could be a kindergarten teacher, but she truly is like a very, very skilled bodyguard, very trained in combat, very dedicated to her job, very fierce when she needs to be. And she gets assigned to become the bodyguard of a famous Hollywood heartthrob named Jack Stapleton. So everything seems okay at first, but then a situation comes up where Jack actually needs to go back to his childhood home, his family home, because his mother has become sick. He needs to return home to spend time with her, to help take care of her, but his bodyguard Hannah has to come along, and he doesn't want a bodyguard around because he doesn't want to stress out his sick mother while she needs all her energy to heal. So he asks Hannah to pose as his girlfriend so she can stay near him, keep an eye on him, but at the same time not stress out his mom. So we get into this fake dating bodyguard situation. First and foremost, I do want to say that I feel like Catherine Center books are always marketed completely wrong, because yes, her synopsis gives kind of a general setup of the romantic plotline in her stories, but the synopsis, like on the back of the book and on Goodreads, doesn't mention like the heavier sad topics that are included in her book. And I found the same thing happened when I read The Love Haters last month or a couple months ago. Hannah, as our protagonist, in the first chapter, on the first page actually, so I don't think this is a spoiler at all, but on the first page, Hannah is at the funeral of her mother who just passed away. So Hannah is dealing with this conflicting feeling of grief with her mother because she also had a very complex relationship with her mother. But I feel like the fact that that happened on page 1 and really sets the trajectory of like the arc that Hannah is about to embark on, I feel like it just does the story such a disservice to not include that in the synopsis. But that's a huge element in the story as well. And so although there are so many wonderful moments of rom-com in this book, like so many silly moments, so many bantery moments, there's definitely a lot more going on behind the romantic story as well. But yeah, throughout the story, like outside of the romance, which I think was done wonderfully, the romance really, I think, to me, portrayed an actual believable case of fake dating. I think I do have an issue with fake dating a lot of the time because the setup of it doesn't make sense, the progression of it doesn't make sense, the reason the two characters don't like just accept that they're not fake dating anymore and that they're real dating, or they've caught feelings for each other, usually does not make sense. But in this one, it did, because of the bodyguard situation, because of the need to stay kind of professional situation, although a lot of those lines were crossed and very fuzzy real quick. To me, it made sense why these characters continued up with this fake dating and like did not want to address that they actually maybe wanted to date in real life. Like it really made sense to me. I also loved how Hannah and Jack both went on these journeys of forgiveness in different ways, of learning how to forgive yourself, on learning how to forgive others, but also keeping your boundaries straight and sticking up for yourself, but at the same time allowing yourself to forgive. And on top of that, I really appreciated that Jack helped Hannah on her arc and Hannah helped Jack on his arc, and they equally contributed to each other. This book had a wild third act conflict. I've been finding Catherine Center third act conflicts to be really absurd lately with this and with The Love Haters, but in a good way, because the worst thing in a romance book for me is a third act conflict that doesn't make sense and is based truly just on miscommunication, on not talking to each other. And I feel like Catherine Center does this play on miscommunication where it's external factors in life that are really impacting the way that our characters can interact with each other. So even if there is a small element of miscommunication in her romance books, it makes sense. It's coming from somewhere. It's not just like you just need to talk to each other and get over yourself. Like there is something happening, something high stakes happening that is triggering this conflict. So yeah, this was a wonderful reading experience for me. Really enjoyed it. Again, thank you so much, Ellen, for sending this to me. It was definitely the romance I needed this past month. We're getting down to our last 3 books. So for my fiction that I read this month, I read The Academy by Ellen Hildebrand and Shelby Cunningham. This is actually a YA fiction, and it's set at Tiffin Academy, which is a small boarding school. It's kind of like a boutique boarding school. We start off at the beginning of the school year, and we follow a diverse cast of characters as they just literally go through the school year. So we go from, I guess, September to like May or June or whenever school ends. But for the setup of this story, the previous year at Tiffin Academy, a student committed suicide. And so we have a lot of students and staff members that are still sort of struggling and trying to come to terms with what happened. But we're starting a new year. We're trying to stay positive. We follow students, teachers, and staff as they go through life at this academy. And as the school year goes on, there is this sort of gossip girl element that is thrown in. There's an app that's developed where we get these anonymous gossip posts, and that also starts triggering this messiness within the school academy. And I find like Ellen Hildebrand does messiness so well. She always writes about these imperfect characters that make the worst decisions, and you're watching them do these things and you're just like, you want to scream at them and tell them to stop, but you also can't stop watching. And I enjoy the way she writes about these messy scenarios because she doesn't write them in a very scandalous way. She doesn't have a very sensational style of writing where she's really spoon feeding to you how you should feel. She is just going through these actions day by day with you and really just telling you what happens. And as the reader, you just get the full impacts of it because you're seeing this like really scandalous thing happening on page told to you in the most mundane way, but then it makes you just feel even more feelings, I find. So loved that about this book. I also think the academy setting was done so well. We really nailed light academia, I think. It felt very intimate. It felt like a school that feels real. Ellen Hildebrand is just so good at describing these environments that make you want to go there. Like with all her Nantucket books, before reading her books, I never really thought of Nantucket as a travel destination. Obviously I knew what it was, but I never felt pulled to go there. After reading her Nantucket books, I was immediately like, I need to go to Nantucket. It is on my bucket list of destinations officially. And now after reading this one, even though Tiffin Academy is a fictional academy, I want to go to the school. Like I want to see it. I really feel the cozy atmosphere. Also, I think one of my pet peeves with some of Ellen's previous books has been the way that she depicts younger characters. I found in some of her previous books, the way she wrote the POVs of her younger characters really felt extra young, like extra immature. It felt like she was exaggerating the youthfulness, the immaturity of her younger characters, maybe because she's not a younger character anymore, so she really wanted to differentiate her adults versus these younger people. But I think because in this one, she co-wrote it with her daughter, who is someone who is younger, I didn't feel that way with like the students, with the younger characters in the story. I found they were actually written very accurately. And yeah, I do have to assume that it was Shelby who helped her with this, who helped her really capture the essence of what it's like to be a student at that age, at a boarding school, dealing with student things, dealing with how to be social at that age. So I really appreciated that in this book. I really enjoyed this book. I did not know this was going to be a series. And at the end of the book, it was very clear that we still had things to do. So after finishing it, I did look on Goodreads and did realize this book is listed as a series. So I thought I was diving into a standalone with this one. I was clearly not, hoping the sequel comes out next year. But that is The Academy by Ellen Hildebrand. Really, really enjoyed it. The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett was my historical fiction that I read. This one has such an interesting premise. So we follow 2 twin sisters. They are Black and they grew up in a southern Black community. And this community that they grew up in is really interesting because everyone who lives here tries to be lighter skinned. So they try not to marry someone who is a darker skinned person, so they can continue to, as a whole town, become a lighter skinned town. So that's our community, but at the age of 16, our twins run away. They just kind of want to get away, get out of this town. And then around 15 years later, one of the twins comes back. So we follow this multi-generational story where we see the effects of, you know, what happened to this twin that came back to this community compared to the other twin who continued to live a more white lifestyle. She married a white husband. She basically like passes for white and pretends that she's not black at this point. So yeah, we see how this affects the two twins first and foremost, and also their families and the next generation of children in their family. And the story spans between like the 50s to the 90s. I overall enjoyed this book. I thought it was good. I do think it was not what I expected though. I thought this was going to be a very emotional, sweeping tale, and I thought it would be more of an interweaving story where we flip back and forth between the two, but we didn't get that. It was very much not that kind of story. The first thing I was surprised about is how separate all of our stories were. We didn't really have like, you know, the interweaving stories that I expected at all, really. Outside of a few moments where we kind of got together, our character stories were all very separate from one another. And in the first half of this book, we didn't even really jump back and forth between the two sisters very much. We pretty much just followed one sister for the entire first half of the book, and then we followed the second sister, and then we kind of had some jumping back and forth later in the book. But yeah, it just wasn't what I expected. I think the themes of the story were really good, and I enjoyed how we explored the idea of like dual identities, multiple identities, of feeling that you're torn between these two things. Like with race, of course, was one thing. We have the one sister that is black but pretending to be white, and so she's sitting on this line where she feels embarrassed, like really ashamed of her black heritage. And then we have another sister who is, you know, struggling on this fence between her identity of being a more light-skinned person but then marrying someone who is blue-black, that's how they mention it in this book, and then having a darker-skinned daughter in this town that has always been trying to aim for lighter skin. And we also explore that idea with gender as well, with other characters that we see throughout the story. So I thought that was really, really well done, and seeing the different sides of that. But it's just not what I expected. Like, as I mentioned, I thought I was gonna jump into this book and feel very connected to the characters, and I didn't feel connected to the characters. I felt more connected to the themes in this book, I think. Overall, this one just took a slower pace. It was more of a slice of life type of story. We didn't have a set beginning, middle, and end as well. Like, we didn't have a build up to a climax, to a resolution. It was just kind of the same feeling and pace throughout, very much just meandering almost through the lives of these different people. I would still recommend because, yeah, I think the themes of this book are very important to read about, but it didn't like hit me hard in the gut the way I thought it would. And then this last book we are going to talk about today is the graphic novel that I read. So I read Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. This is a YA romance graphic novel. We follow Charlie, who is gay. He attends an all-boys school and he's just not very popular. He's always been a bit of an outsider. He's often the victim of bullying. And at the beginning of the book, he gets paired in a lab or in a class with Nick, who is a very popular rugby player at the school. And we just, yeah, follow their story as they become friends, maybe become something a little bit more. And it's a very cute story. I honestly don't have too much to say because I think with the nature of graphic novels, like this is just volume 1. There's not much that happened in this book. It really felt like more of a setup to a romance story. Like, we didn't get into the meat of things, but it was cute. It was fun to read. It was a nice, lovely half an hour of my life. And I did enjoy the graphic novel style where the author and illustrator can really time out beats for you, depending on how large they make an image, depending on how many times they kind of repeat an image or stay in the same moment. I haven't read too many graphic novels, so I found that to be just something fun that I observed. It kind of just felt like a mix between watching a rom-com and reading a rom-com. It really felt like the middle ground in between there. I don't know if I'll be continuing the series. I found it to be very cute and fun, but I'm still just not convinced on the graphic novel format in general for me. I think if I like want to pick up a book, I like a lot of words. I like a lot of story, where if I want something visual, I don't know, me personally, I would rather just like watch something. So yeah, I'm still a little torn on the graphic novel format. Obviously, I have a lot of respect for Alice as an illustrator. The graphics and illustrations are very, very cute in this. So yeah, it was fun, but I still just, I don't know if graphic novels are for me. But that being said, those are the 14 books that I read in the month of November. Honestly, like, I am still in awe at how good of a reading month that was. I can't believe I had so many high rated books this past month, but let's get these books onto the shelves. Alright, that's going to be it for now. I hope you enjoyed this wrap up. If you did, please leave me a like and a comment. If you don't know what to comment down below, let me know what you read in November. If you like me, subscribe, do that bell thing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!